Hey, good morning. Welcome to our webinar today. This is David with Heart4Iran, Director of Development for Heart4Iran. And we are so excited to have you with us today. Today's topic is a pretty important topic, but it's also a heavy topic. We're going to be talking a lot about persecution today and how that has changed over the years in the Middle East and specifically in Iran. We're going to be diving into that. We've got some really great guests that we want to introduce you to today. But to get started, of course, as always, I want to open us up with a word of prayer. Pray with me, please. Dear Lord, we just thank you for this day and this chance to be together, this chance to focus on what you're doing in Iran, but also to support and encourage the persecuted church on the ground. We pray that you would be with us and bless us this time so that we can communicate the needs and what's happening in a real and genuine way. These things we ask in your name, Jesus. Amen. All right, if you're joining us through Facebook Live or on YouTube Live right now, we want to encourage you to post your questions throughout the webinar. We're really excited that you're here with us, and the most important part of this webinar is to hear from you. So please join us in those questions and comments, and we're definitely going to get to those near the end. But to get started in this, I want to welcome my co-host, Mike, with us today. Mike, welcome and glad to have you and super excited to talk about this topic.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us at our Heart4Iran's monthly webinar series. We've been doing these ever since the onset of coronavirus in February, March of this year. We've been totally encouraged by you guys, by the audience, and that's why every month we are showcasing what seems to be really, really important for the region and also for you, our friends in the West. Today, we're going to be talking about persecution. Let me remind you of what Hebrews says. Hebrews chapter 13, verse 3 says, "Remember those in prison as if you were their fellow prisoners, and those who are mistreated as if you yourselves were suffering." Yes, suffering is happening in the name of Jesus all across the world, but in particular, we want to talk about today about the fact that persecution and suffering takes many forms, from oppression and discrimination to denial of constitutional and internationally acknowledged freedoms. For centuries, Christians in Middle East and North Africa have been discriminated against, marginalized, detained, imprisoned, tortured, and even killed for their faith in Jesus Christ. And that's something that most media outlets do not talk about, unfortunately. So what happens here is that believers from Muslim background in particular are often in great danger, suffering in silence. They're cut off from family and Christian fellowship and vulnerable to abuse by state security forces and extremist groups. We are going to be talking about persecution and the different forms of persecution today, and then focus on Iran. But the organization that is one of the pioneers and one of the leading organizations that we are working with and we're going to showcase today is called Middle East Concern. Middle East Concern basically was founded in 1991 in response to needs expressed by Christian leaders, by you in the Middle East and North Africa region. And they support people in that region who are, again, marginalized, discriminated against, and persecuted for being or becoming Christians. This webinar is open. We would love to get your questions. So please go ahead and right there on the platform, make sure on the chat area you ask us your questions and get involved. This is a great opportunity. We do have our friends from Middle East Concern with us. But before we go any further, let us show you guys a video, a very short video that gives you a bigger picture of who Middle East Concern is and what they do so well. And then we're going to dive into it. So take a look at this video.
For centuries, Christians in the Middle East and North Africa have faced discrimination, marginalization, or even persecution. Christians can be targeted by extremist groups. They are often vulnerable to abuse from their local communities, or even from the state. People who become Christians are often cut off from their families, and may have no Christian fellowship to support them. They can be imprisoned, tortured, or even killed. We believe something has to be done. And that's why Middle East Concern was set up. We offer encouragement and expertise and mobilize worldwide prayer. We advocate for the rights of Christians. We challenge unjust laws and attitudes and lobby governments to take action. We use our international influence to fight for the release of people imprisoned for their Christian faith. We stand up for the right of Christians to worship freely. In times of crisis, we provide practical support, for example, to Christians fleeing life-threatening persecution. We train Christian leaders in constitutional rights and international law so they can speak up for the church as it faces persecution. We also provide training in crisis management and how to handle being arrested and interrogated. Everything we do is done in partnership with local Christian leaders. We are Middle East Concern, defending the religious freedom of Christians.
All right, that's a great. Thanks for sharing that. So right now, we want to welcome our guests to the webinar. As Mike mentioned, this Middle East Concern is going to be joining us today to talk about this persecution, what's changed with persecution, and what are the hot topics and needs in persecution generally and also in Iran. So joining us to cover that, we have Rob and Daniel from Middle East Concern on the line with us. I want you guys to notice that, typically we will have a video feed of people with us because of the sensitivity of this topic. We have Rob and Daniel here with us, but they're on audio only, so they're not going to be sharing their faces for sensitivity reasons. And, we totally respect that and understand that. We realize when we're working in persecuted regions like we are, that every organization has their own protocols and rules as far as how they want to be hiding or using security best practices. So just want to point that out there. The first people to join us that have not used the video, but we totally understand that and respect that. And we want to honor their requests and the sensitivity of this nature. But right now, let's welcome Daniel and Rob to the webinar. Daniel, Rob, we're excited to have you with us today.
Thank you very much. Excited to be here. Thank you for having us.
Yes,
that's great.
It's very good that we can share with you this morning.
Great. Welcome. Thank you guys so much again for coming. So Daniel, you are the Middle East Concern Executive Director. I want to start with you. Tell us a little bit. We saw the video. Tell us a little bit about Middle East Concern and what you guys are doing around the world to deal with persecution and take this tough topic on.
Thank you very much. I mean, I hope the video gave a little bit of an idea of what we do. Maybe one thing to stress is MEC is not predominantly one organization, but it's a partnership of many different organizations who want to coordinate and bring their strengths together in assisting Christians where they face persecution. We very much believe in the local church, and our aim, we usually describe our aim as trying to encourage and assist and equip the church to fulfill their calling in the context of persecution. The main aim is not to make sure all persecution goes away, but the main aim is to see the church flourish in the context of the challenges that they face. And we do that by helping individual victims as they face persecution through prayer, through advocacy, through different ways of encouraging them and seeking more structural changes in laws or government policies and things like that, and in training and equipping the church in the skills and the knowledge that they need to hopefully flourish in their context.
That's excellent. Daniel, we were talking a little bit before the webinar, but what's different today about persecution as, say, that was happening 10 years ago? And what are some of the trends that you're seeing generally in the world as far as persecution?
Thank you. I think one big change we see now compared to 10 years ago in the Middle East and North Africa region is we have many more countries where there are armed groups, non-state armed groups who are fighting against the government, if there is a government. Sometimes there is none. If you look at countries like Iraq, Syria, Yemen, Libya, and other places. And a lot of these groups are involved in violence and attacks against Christians as well, or even where Christians are not directly targeted by these groups. Just the general lack of rule of law and the general violence and uncertainties in these countries put pressure on Christian communities. And I think a second trend that we have seen, and probably are going to see increasingly in numerous countries in the Middle East region, is that from younger generations there is a pushback against more conservative expressions of Islam in their countries. Many of the younger generations, we say, we don't want religion to define everything in our lives. But because of that, there is a pushback from those more conservative Islamic circles. Sometimes that is directly from the government, like in Iran, for instance. Sometimes it's some of those groups and those sections of society that are putting pressure on the government to strengthen the role of conservative Islam. And again, that can lead to pressures both from the government, but also from groups in society, and sometimes even from families or people in the neighborhood on Christian communities, especially those who have converted from a Muslim background.
Yes, thank you. So I know, I don't know what the general, vanilla persecution looks like anymore, because, maybe you think that it's the government is persecuting, or maybe the family persecuting, and now you're talking about these groups that are, these paramilitary groups or extra groups out there that are persecuting as well. Can you give us an example of what that might look like, a real story of someone that's being persecuted by this kind of third type, or a situation where that's happened?
Yeah, I mean, in Iraq, we probably all have heard stories, but especially nowadays, there was, of course, the Islamic State. They have now been, at least by and large, militarily defeated. But for instance, in the Nineveh plain in Iraq, which is the birth ground, so to speak, of the Christian communities in Iraq, we see now a lot of the Shia armed groups who fought and were a large part in defeating ISIS there, now putting pressure on the Christian communities by sometimes they drive by and they shoot at churches, they may interrupt Christian gatherings, they may put pressure on Christians to sell their houses and their property and to move out, so other Shia families then move in these places, and their aim seems to be demographic changes by pushing the Christians out and replacing them with other Shia Muslim communities.
Wow.
This is interesting. David, if I may just refer to something that's happening right now. Many of you guys are following the news. You're realizing that the French government or the French, they released a cartoon about the prophet. And then there have been uprisings in Pakistan, and President Erdogan in Turkey has also denounced President Macron. And we see often in these crises a lot of backlash towards Christians in those regions that are already persecuted to begin with. So there are different forms of persecution that takes place. So you mentioned, drive-by shootings, basically pushing the Christian population out of neighborhoods. Can you take a moment, either one of you gentlemen, explain to us different forms of persecution? Because persecution, when we talk about persecution, we just think about somebody being killed or somebody being put in jail. But apparently there are different forms of persecution. Would you just briefly dive into that and explain to our audience what are the different forms of persecution?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it can indeed take many different forms. Sometimes it takes the form of marginalization. Christian communities have the idea, and they're treated as if they're second-rate citizens or second-rate members of society. There are that should be grateful that they're allowed to exist, so to speak, but they shouldn't speak up too much. They shouldn't expect to be treated equally to the Muslims around them. There can be a lot of discrimination in employment, for instance, or discrimination in school. Teachers may deal with Christian students differently than they do with Muslim students. Often, especially when the Christian students are smarter or are among the top of the class, that can create problems for them because people get jealous, and they're supposed to be quiet and not so noticeable and not not appear to be like among the top of the class. So that may cause difficulties as well. We already said there can be pressure from the authorities, especially if they do not just quietly exist, but seek either to be more prominent in society or seek to share their faith with the Muslims around them. That's usually not tolerated, neither by society nor by most governments. And there can be violent acts, either by armed groups against church buildings. There have been bombings and shootings and things like that. And especially those who have converted from Islam to Christianity, they face a lot of, at the minimum, harassment and discrimination, but often violence as well, either from their families, from the government, from other groups in society, and unfortunately, often from all of these combined.
Go ahead, David. I do have another question that I wanted to ask, but I noticed that you also wanted to share something. Go ahead.
No, that's fine. Yeah, I wanted to get Rob on the phone. So Daniel, thank you so much for sharing. That's really great. Rob, I want to introduce you and get you on the phone as well. So Rob, you're the regional director, and we know each other because of a lot of opportunities to be together in Iran conferences and times that we've met together and talked about things. So I'm always excited to be with you, Rob, and talk and everything. So welcome to the episode. And I just want to hear from you about your role and how specifically you're working against persecution.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, my role is very much to connect with people on the ground. As we saw in the introductory video, we try to cooperate as much as possible with entities on the ground, with the church, where the church is there. But in a place like Iran, of course, for the Christian converts, really there's no such thing as an institutionalized church. People have to meet underground in house churches. But it's still possible to be able to connect up with people and to be able to assist in different situations as they arise. And I have authorization actually to get prayer for a couple of situations that I would like to bring before the people who are sharing in this webinar. So if we could have the first picture, please.
Yeah, absolutely. Rob, let me help you set that up. So for our audience out there, we want to talk generally about what's happening, in the region, some of the changes that are taking place. But Rob has actually brought to us some specific cases that he wants to share and that we want to discuss. So Rob, as we get that first one queued up, can you tell us a little bit about the process of why sometimes you don't share the person's case and then sometimes we do share the person's case? I know that's come up for us before with our TV channel. Sometimes we converse with you guys and you say like, this one we're keeping back, and then later you'll say like, okay, this one you can publicize. Can you talk a little bit about what would make these publicizable and others not?
Well, it's really a form of data protection, I suppose. So if we're going to make anything public, we need to have the authorization either of the person themselves, who is directly involved in the situation, or those who are closest to the person. These might be family members, or they might be involved in ministry and have some sort of authority to be able to speak on their behalf. But it's very important to be able to respect the wishes of the person or those close to the person or people involved in a particular crisis, and to be able to advise as well. There are certain situations where perhaps publicity could backfire on people or situations, and so it requires prayer and careful consideration, and also a lot of discussion at times to decide what's the best way forward. And of course, once something is out there in the public arena, you can't take it back again. It's there, so it's much better to be on the cautious side.
Absolutely. So yeah, let's go ahead and share that first one. We'd love to hear this first case and a little bit more about it.
Well, this man in the photo, he's known by the name Johan. He's birth name is Mohammad Reza Omidi, and he lives in Rasht, and he's a Christian convert. His family there, his wife is Mariam, and he's got 2 daughters. And as I said, Christian converts are not able to meet freely in Iran. Instead, they will often have to meet secretly, really, out of the eyes of the authorities. And if they are caught by security agents, they can face severe penalties. In Johan's case, he was actually arrested in 2016, along with his pastor, Yusuf Nadarkhani, and a couple of other converts as well. And at that time, they were charged with acting against national security. And he was sentenced to 10 years in prison, because of promoting churches, I suppose you would say, these house churches. And then in addition to that, he was also given 2 years in internal exile. So the authorities said that he had to move away from his home in the north of Iran, right down to the south, and spend 2 years there. And not only that, because they were having communion at the time, and they were using communion wine, which is of course illegal for Muslims, he was sentenced to receive 80 lashes. And it's really very severe. The good thing, though, is that in May this year, his sentence was reviewed and actually reduced to 2 years. So he was freed in August. But after that, he had to go to this place for the period of exile. And then just 2 weeks ago, he was called back to Rasht to face this punishment of having 80 lashes. Now, Johan says himself that the person giving the punishment was actually very lenient once he found out exactly what it was for. But even so, of course, it's just so unjust. But I'm amazed at Johan's way of looking at this. And he spoke to a friend, and I'd just like to read what he says. I trust God in this as I did for my imprisonment. Many people, even those around me, consider it a time wasted, he's speaking about this time of exile, in your life. But seeing ourselves as a piece of the puzzle in the greater image God is creating, I gladly embrace this opportunity to go through this exile. My experience may help other Christians who will face similar exile sentences in the future. I think that's such a statement of faith. Wow. And I would really like people to pray for this brother and for his family as well during this time, that it will be a period of blessing for them.
Mike, are you familiar with this case?
Yes, yes, I am familiar with this case, actually through Middle East Concern, through our friends. We have been working as Heart4Iran with Middle East Concern and some other advocacy organizations for years, trying to better understand what is going on. The reason for that is because people who are in those countries usually get to know about Christ most often through media outlets such as Mohabbat TV. And then when they give their heart to Christ and they get together, they start growing in their new faith. And that's when they get on the radar of the authorities. And that's when the chapter of persecution starts. So we have been in touch with Middle East Concern about these things. And we know what is going on. The other thing that I wanted to share with you, we are talking about isolated believers, David, in Iran, that are becoming believers. They're becoming Christian, leaving Islam for Christ. And we are finding some of those individuals on our own virtual churches. As you know, this month, October of 2020, it marks 1 year anniversary where Heart4Iran launched its virtual church platform targeting the isolated believers in Iran. So we have cases like Yuhan participating on these weekly virtual gatherings and fellowships. But the question that I would have for Rob and for Daniel is, Iran being persecuted and a closed country, we really have no idea how many people like Yuhan exist that are being persecuted directly and the families are being targeted. Would you know, just by guess, I guess, or by any means, what are the numbers? What is the volume of Iranian believers that are facing this kind of a persecution in Iran? Do you have any number associated with that?
Well, it's very difficult to give numbers of people who are facing, opposition. Certainly with Johan's situation, this is something more extreme. And we do have some numbers of those people who are in prison that are known about. It's quite possible that there are others in more rural areas of Iran, for example, and we just don't know about them. Nobody has reported them. As you said, sometimes these people, they come to faith through different ministries, and they're isolated themselves. They can attract the attention of the Iranian security, and who would know about this? How would the information reach us? So I'm afraid it's very difficult to give a clear picture of exactly what's going on.
Rob, let me ask you a question, you and Daniel. So for our audience and for people who are listening to this, how would you be able to prepare for arrest? Because we know persecution is a biblical theology. It happens, and the Bible talks about it. Persecution is happening and will continue to happen in those regions. So we need to educate the audience, the people in those countries, about persecution and arrest. How does Middle East Concern go about preparing for arrest, and what happens when someone is arrested?
Well, one of the ways we do that is through a seminar that takes several hours. So we don't have time to go through all of that right now. But I think it's important to say specifically for interrogation and arrest, there are two elements to it. One is a more spiritual element, to help them and be prepared for the pressure, to help them and be prepared to deal with fear, to help them and be prepared with the uncertainty, to remind them of the promises that God will be with them and give them words to speak, etc., etc. And then there are, if you like, more practical things. I'm not implying that spiritual things are not practical, but more things like understanding how interrogations work and understanding the aim of the interrogator and how they try and put pressure on you and how they may try and trick you into certain things. And again, by giving you a better understanding of what may be happening and what your interrogators are aiming to do, hopefully give you some tools, if you like, to try and counter some of these and not fall into their traps, in a sense.
Yeah, very good. Daniel, that's great. I can hear you. I think we're having some trouble with Mike's audio, perhaps. We'll continue forward. But my question is, I know we have another case we want to get to from Rob, but quickly, Rob, what was Johan at home service when he was arrested? I just wasn't super clear on that aspect of it.
Yes, Johan was meeting together with a group of people, from his church, so to speak. As I said, how we understand church is something different. It's a much more flexible situation in Iran, where people have to be so careful when they meet together. And somehow or another, the authorities got wind of this meeting and were able to raid the place where they were and arrest the people.
So what happened to his children? And were they there? Were they also arrested at that time, or was he the only one taken?
No, at that time, it was the case that the authorities, they just arrested. No, they arrested 5 people. They arrested the pastor, and then 3 converts who were also involved in, shall we say, a leadership role. And then also the wife of the pastor. She was arrested, but then released later after, I think it was the next day.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, thank you. That just gives me a lot of clarity. These are real people. This is happening, and it helps me paint a picture in my mind of how this is happening. We have a little bit of time. I want to jump into the next slide. Which one would you like to talk about next?
Okay, well, slide 2. This is a couple who couldn't have children. So Sam and Mariam, and they were able to adopt the daughter there, Lydia, about 1.5 years ago, at the beginning of 2019. But later on, last year, they were both arrested, and they were also sentenced as well. But even worse than that, the court in the city where they come from, which is Bushehr, decided that they could no longer parent their adopted daughter, Lydia. So back in July, they said that they weren't fit to be parents because Lydia was considered to be a Muslim. I mean, who knows what family she came from? She was in an orphanage. But because it was now clear that Sam and Mariam were Christian converts, the court didn't want to allow them to look after this daughter. And amazingly, there's been a lot of support within Iran for this case, and internationally as well. In fact, I just read today that in Stockholm, in Sweden, there was a demonstration by some Iranian Christians on their behalf. But even more than that, a couple of grand ayatollahs, these senior religious people in Iran, they said that it's permissible for them to look after their daughter. And 120 lawyers and activists in Iran wrote an open letter to the head of judiciary saying, please overturn this sentence. Let this couple keep their daughter. And so this is something else I would like to ask prayer for, that Sam and Mariam would be allowed to continue to be the parents of Lydia.
So Rob, if you can hear me, can you hear me?
Yes.
So you are saying that Iranian government took the child of a couple that were converts, and they basically are saying that they're going to raise the child under a different roof than her own parents, right?
Yes, they were saying that the child needs to go back to the orphanage, and that the child, Lydia, has actually got health issues. There's a problem with her heart. So even the court, when they decided that they should be separated, actually acknowledged that probably she would just be institutionalized, that this small child would end up growing up within the orphanage.
That is really heartbreaking. Folks, imagine this. Imagine you guys have adopted a child, and all of a sudden, just because you're Christian, the government steps in and takes your child away because they say you're not fit to be a parent to a sick child because you have changed your faith from Islam to Christianity. That is a form of persecution. That is a reality of what is happening in Iran and in the Middle East. And that is why we're showcasing Middle East Concern today, one of the major advocacy organizations in the region, in the theater, that is very active and doing their work. We do encourage you to visit them and their website and see what you can do to help us stand next to them and support them. I do want to go ahead and I know that you have another case to share with us, but there are some questions that are coming in from our audience, and I just, if it's okay with David, I was going to go ahead and pose one of the questions to you real fast. A question that came in is saying that we do realize that Iran has one of the fastest growing churches, and there is also persecution associated with it. Would you know, based on your work among the persecuted, why this is happening? What are a few things that you think are the causes of the faith of Christianity to grow so fast in Iran despite persecution?
Well, I think you're probably aware that recently there was a survey done from a group in Holland. They were able to survey about 50,000 Iranians and found out through that 1.5% are self-identify as Christians. Now, if you extrapolate that to the population, then you're looking at a significant Christian population within the country. But of course, it doesn't just show that. It also shows that there is a weakening in people's support for how the regime sees Shia Islam. And so it creates a vacuum that there is an opportunity there for people to step in, for the gospel to actually reach many people who are open to receiving an alternative worldview, in fact.
Right. Well, this brings us to the next question, Rob and Daniel. David is joining us, guys. We are having some technical issues, but bear with us because we're tag teaming our brothers here. This opens up a bigger picture, and I want to go back again and talk about Iran. But a question that has been asked us today on this webinar by an audience member of the audience, which has been going around the world for the last month, is what is happening right now between Israel and Arab world. Okay, we're seeing a lot of persecution in the Arab world as well of Christians. Can you comment on Israel and Arab countries' agreement to peace, and if these efforts will help ease persecution in some of those countries? What would be your thoughts and your answers to that question?
I think one important reason behind the recent agreements between a number of Arab states and the state of Israel is because they see that they have a common enemy. They are both afraid, or maybe not afraid, they are both threatened by Iran. And they know that if they work together to counter this threat, they stand stronger. So behind the scenes for a number of years now, for instance, there have been strong intelligence cooperation, for instance, between the Israeli Secret Service and the Secret Service in especially a number of Gulf states, for instance. And now what you see is in a sense, partly a fruit of some of those discussions and those efforts. They have been cooperating for some time already, and now that has become more public. And in some countries as well, it is they both see the threat from more extremist Islamic groups. For instance, the governments in Jordan and in Israel have been working together in countering some of those threats for a number of years as well. So behind the scenes, some of these cooperations have been going on for longer, and we see them coming out in the open now. And again, I think it's largely because they see they have common enemies, and if they work together to confront these, they stand stronger and are more likely to be successful.
Daniel, before I pass on to David, because I know David has more questions, let me just ask one follow-up question that has come in through here. I think it's relevant to this. Another member of audience is asking us, they're saying that does your organization, Middle East Concern, track some of the persecution incidents in the Western countries? We know we now see persecution in Europe where some of the persecutors are relocating to some of these Western countries. So these incidents are kind of following some of these people into the West. Does MEC, Middle East Concern, follow these persecutions in Western countries?
You mean where Arabs or Iranians or others move to Western countries and continue
Absolutely.
to persecute?
Yes.
Yeah. Not on the large and direct scale. Sometimes from the side we are involved. For instance, at the moment we have discussions with the German government relating to some things. So sometimes we give some advice, if you like, or share some of our experience and insights. But it's not our main focus. Our main focus is strengthening the church in the countries of the Middle East and North Africa, including Iran.
Great. David?
Yeah, thank you. Sorry about that. We are having some technical issues today. I really apologize. Hopefully we'll be able to get that resolved before the next time. But this has just been a great conversation. And I just want to go back to, we do have some great questions from the audience. But I want to go back to, how many of those cases were we able to do? I just saw 2 before I got kicked off. Did we have time to do one more?
Absolutely. I think we should do one more. Rob, You have one more case that you can share with us if you don't mind. The floor is yours.
Okay, well, if we have a look at picture 3, please. This is another Christian convert. His name is Ibrahim Firuzi. And yeah, he spent quite a long time in prison. In fact, he had to serve 2 prison sentences consecutively. Yeah, after a couple of years, it was thought that he would be released, and he was expecting that. And then instead of that, he was brought before court again and given an additional prison sentence. But not only that, he was also given 2 years of exile as well. Yeah, just like Yuhan. So this seems to be a technique that the Iranian authorities are employing as a punishment to try and separate converts from their families and from their friends as well. So at the moment, Ibrahim is now at a small town on the border between Pakistan and Iran, in quite a difficult situation. But even there, he's being monitored by the authorities. And again, he's someone that we should be praying for.
Rob, I've heard you mention the idea of exile. What exactly does that mean, and what does it look like? I just want to clarify for our audience. What is this exile? Is it government mandated, and what does it look like?
Yes, it's part of the sentence. So people will be given a prison sentence, and then in addition to that, they're told once they're finished prison, they then have to move away from their hometown to a place at the other end of the country. So if they're from the south of Iran, they'll be moved up to the north. If they're from the north, they'll be moved somewhere out, either east or south. And it's generally 2 years that they have to spend there. But everything is from their own expense as well. So they have to pay the travel costs. They then have to find accommodation to stay in. They have to try and set up a new life for themselves during this period.
Are they allowed to work during that time, or are they just expected to pay for all of this? How does that work?
Well, they're expected to work, but of course the problem is they don't have the connections. They're moving to a place they don't know. There are not often people around who are able to help them through this situation during this period of adjustment. But not only that, of course, these people, because they've been in prison, they now have a criminal record. And so if they're even applying for work, they're going to be discriminated against on that basis.
Wow. So do people often flee the country when they've been given this exile, or how many people are staying and serving this full exile? How many people are leaving and just, trying to find a home somewhere else?
That's a good question. I think most of the people with exile have actually decided that they don't want to flee the country and that they're determined to stay as much as is possible for them. But what you do find is where people have a long prison sentence ahead of them and they have been temporarily released by putting down a bail payment, which is often very expensive. Sometimes it's the house title deeds of perhaps their own property or perhaps a family member. And then rather than spending, say, 5 or 10 years in prison, they flee the country. But then, of course, what happens to the property? The government are able to take control of it.
Wow. So, Rob, all of the cases that we looked at today involve some kind of court situation and some kind of legal. When it comes to Iran, is there kind of that family on family persecution, or that third type of persecution that Daniel was talking about of these militant groups? Is any of that happening in Iran, and what does it look like?
It's interesting to contrast the situation in Iran with other countries in the Middle East. And in places like Iraq, in Syria as well, perhaps in Jordan, where you have quite a strong tribal community, there you have strong family connections, and you have a lot of persecution coming directly from close family members. In Iran, it does happen, but it's much rarer compared to other Middle Eastern countries. Of course, it depends on the family. You do have certain families where honor and shame play a part, of course. And if someone comes to believe in Jesus, it's looked upon as something that's disgraceful for the rest of the family, and they might take steps against that. But yeah, praise God, it doesn't happen all the time.
So Rob and Daniel, thank you so much. People who are watching this program, you are watching Heart for Iran's monthly webinar series. We're focusing on persecution and the means of different types of persecution with our friends that Middle East concern. This program is going to be posted online, and please do share with other people. I find this to be highly informative, especially for the church. This brings us, Rob and Daniel, to the next question, the bigger question. We do have people of the audience asking us what can they do here in US or in Europe to help Middle East concern. If you don't mind, the question that I have is a two-pronged question. If you could tell us about the annual report that you have worked on with different organizations, and also what is the church's responsibility for our audience members who are listening to this program, watching this program, pastors, leaders of the church in the West, what would be the church's responsibility? So again, the question is, what is the church's responsibility? And tell us more about your annual report.
Thank you. In terms of, you mentioned earlier, or it has come up several times, there are many different forms of persecution, and that's true. And therefore, there are also different reactions to persecution. Usually they fall within one of three groups. Sometimes people decide to, if you like, stand up or resist persecution. In some settings, in some countries, it may be possible to, for instance, go to court and try to address something, or you can try and mobilize international pressure on your government to try and relieve a situation. Sometimes people decide to flee. We already alluded to that a minute ago. Often that is within the same country or within the Middle East region. Sometimes it is abroad. And sometimes people decide to accept the persecution and not try to stand up or not to flee. We even have people who are in prison and say, we believe for this season of our life, God wants us to be in prison. So please don't do anything to try and get me out of prison. But I think the most important thing in all of these situations is no one should ever suffer alone. Even if they say, we don't want to resist or flee or anything, we feel this is the situation God wants us to be in for this moment in our lives. They should know that people are praying for them and people are standing with them. So to come to your question, what people can do, I think it's, of course, important to pray. And there are different organizations that mobilize prayer for persecuted Christians. People can go to our website and subscribe to receive prayer requests. But again, there are other organizations that mobilize prayer as well. I think it's important, especially for churches and church leaders, to try and create awareness as well within their congregation that this is happening, this is real, people are suffering, and people are encouraged by us praying for them. And God, of course, answers prayers and brings changes into people's situation. And sometimes there may be ways of encouraging Christians as well. In some circumstances, it may be possible, for instance, to send a letter of encouragement or something like that to Christians who are suffering as well. And I think finally, also in the US, to try and communicate with your political representatives and say, this is something that is happening and this is something that is important to us. And therefore, you as our representative in Congress, we want you to know that this is important for us, and we would like you to do what you can with the position that God has put you in to address some of these issues as well.
Wow, Daniel, you mentioned something in your statement about, some of the people that you talk with, they say, hey, we feel like this is our time to be in prison. That just really struck me, and I'm sure it struck our audience as well. Can we dive into that, Rob or Daniel, a little bit more? Tell me about the mindset of the persecuted church in general, and their willingness to suffer, their willingness to really see God even in this persecution. I mean, that's a deep spiritual thing. Could you guys talk about that a little bit more?
I think, or I certainly hope, that we will always encourage people. I said before, there are different ways of responding to persecution. So even when people come to us and say, this has happened either to me, or this has happened to one of my disciples, or this has happened to my husband, whatever, what should we do? We would always encourage people to be in prayer and to try and discern in this particular situation, how is the Lord leading us to respond? Is it maybe to flee? Is it maybe to resist? Or is it maybe not to do any of these things? And even those different options can take many, many different forms. So I think the important thing is always to encourage people to seek the Lord's leading in what to do. Because of course, even if somebody says, I'm in prison and I want my case to go to court, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are not submitting to God's will for their life.
Well, that's true.
Yeah,
that's true. Rob, we did get a question specifically, and I just want to ask you guys, what would be the one thing, all this experience you have with dealing with people that are suffering in this way, what would be the one takeaway that you would want the church in the West to have with regards to persecution? You guys see a lot of this. What would be the one takeaway or learning for our audience?
I think if we remember the verse from the Bible that Mike read at the beginning, from Hebrews, chapter 13, to be able to actually engage with persecuted people, whether it's through prayer or whether it's through following what is happening as well. And rather than just passively staying to the side, to at least try to understand the situation better, and to engage prayerfully with that situation, and possibly to develop that further.
Amen.
David, I'm actually looking at the Middle East Concern website, and for those of you guys who are not following their website, make sure it is mecconcern.org. And they have really captured this really well. They say the church in the West should assist victims of persecution, challenge unjust laws, policies, and attitudes. And the third one is equip Christians, other Christians, to first face persecution. That is right on their website. And I just feel that that not only answers the question that our audience member had asked, but kind of gives us a great mandate as believers in the West to make sure we do that. Again, assist the victims, challenge unjust laws and policies, and equip other Christians to facing persecution. I know our time is a bit limited. We only have about 5 or 6 minutes left. But I do want to follow up on that other question that I had for you, gentlemen, about that report, about the annual report that you had put together. We wanted to talk about that. Can you give us a maybe 1 minute, 30-second, 1 minute update of what it is? And the link for that would be, people would be on your chat bot right there. Go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, if the link is not there, they can go to the website and just search for Annual Report Iran, and both the last one and the one from the previous year will come up. So it's a collaborative effort with 3 different other organizations to raise awareness of the situation of Christians in Iran, the different types of pressure that they face. It gives some very specific examples, and it can be used in different ways. It can be used for people to pray. There are many different cases of people in prison and other forms of persecution that people can use to pray over. They can use it to share with others in their church or other settings to raise awareness of the situation of Christians in Iran. And they can even share it with their politicians, their members of Congress or others, and say, this is what's happening. At the end of the report, there are some recommendations, both for the Iranian government and for the international community, that politicians can make use of as well. So the basic idea is to show what is happening, and because it's an annual report, it happened 2 years ago, last year, there will be one for this year as well, etc. People can read it and see developments and changes and trends as well, because we look at some of the same issues year after year, so we can make some comparisons and look at trends as well.
And that's Daniel, that's a collaborative effort.
That's correct. Yes. So it's you will see it in the report, but it's a joint effort between Middle East Concern, Open Doors, Article 18 and CSW.
Wow. Well, thank you guys so much for what you're doing. We certainly see this from our side of the ministry, but it's always great to know that you guys are there working so diligently and detailed in this. So we put the website meconcern.org. That's how people can find out more about you. How would you like them to reach out to you? Email, anything like that?
Yeah, email is the easiest. It's basically, it appears on the screen, I think here, office@meconcern.org. If people can write to us, and then depending on the question, we will forward it to the staff member who's best suited to answer the question.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we're happy to connect with people. Yeah.
Now, what are the biggest prayer points that people should take away? What is an urgent case or anything that you would want people to pray for right now?
Well, Rob already, of course, mentioned a number of cases in Iran that people can pray for. That's very important. I mentioned as well, maybe a more general prayer point is the different situations in countries of armed conflict, Syria, Iraq, Yemen, Libya as well, where there is a lot of violence in general, but also the Christian communities are often suffering a lot, either as citizens in that country, they suffer with everyone else, but often they suffer specific vulnerabilities as Christians as well. So prayer for that would be much appreciated as well. I'm not certain what to choose. I mean, I can give you probably 100 different prayer requests.
Very good. Yeah. Very good. Daniel, thank you so much. And Rob, we really appreciate both of this.
If people go to our website and they click on the news section, they will see many different prayer requests listed there as well.
Absolutely. Well, thank you guys again so much for joining us. I just want to say, as Heart4Iran, we are actively involved in ministry to Iran, but of course we care about the entire region. And, we're so thankful to have partners like Middle East Concern that are focused in on helping Christians, new believers, these that are going through this kind of persecution and tough times. They have a whole strategy for that. They have resources behind that. And we just want to encourage you to get to know them better, support them, encourage them in what they're trying to do. Of course, we always want to give you guys an opportunity to get involved with what's happening with the persecuted church, the underground church, the virtual church, things that are happening in Iran today. And so we do have a giving page, heart4iran.com/donate. If you want to support the persecuted church, of course, you can find out more through MEC. You can also reach out directly through us. We want to encourage you to do that. Be with them. Mike, I want you to share, if you don't mind, would you share that Bible verse again that you opened with, and just encourage everyone the importance of our opportunity and our role to support and stand with the persecuted church at this time.
Absolutely. And let me open it up. This was going to the About page of Middle East Concern. I want to encourage you guys to go visit. And the verse is Hebrews 13:3. Remember those in prison as if you were their fellow prisoners, and those who are mistreated as if you yourselves were suffering. So that is the verse that we wanted to share with you guys. People, it's been a pleasure to be with you. I do want to encourage you to please join us at our next webinar on December 1st. We're going to be we're going to have an awesome program with Global Catalytic Ministries and also the producer of Sheep Among Wolves movies that came out and made a huge wave. So it will be a special treat December 1st on a Tuesday. Make sure to pencil that in your calendar. On behalf of Heart4Iran, we want to thank you all for joining us. It's been a pleasure to have you here. Rob and Daniel, keep up the good work, and we bless you and we thank you. Dave, back to you.
All right. Well, you wrapped it up pretty well. Again, just so thankful to have our guests here today. Thankful for our audience. Please, if you're seeing this on Facebook, be sure to reach out to us. If you're seeing this on YouTube, reach out to us and share this out and let people know what's happening in Iran and what they can do to be a part of serving the persecuted church in Iran. So to everyone watching and to all our guests, thank you again for being with us. God bless you. and we look forward to seeing you again next month.